When Stu finds out about his wife's hidden life, his world is shattered. But through the pain, he embarks on a journey of rediscovery, forging new connections and finding strength where he never expected. Watch his story of transformation, hope, and unexpected love. Welcome to RedHead Cheating, your premier YouTube channel dedicated to unveiling jaw-dropping and unbelievable tales of infidelity. We are your go-to source for the most shocking and scandalous cheating stories that will leave you both horrified and intrigued. Join us as we delve into the secrets, lies, and betrayals that have rocked relationships and shattered trust. Our channel is committed to sharing these cautionary and eye-opening narratives, not to glorify cheating, but to shed light on the devastating consequences it can have on individuals and families. Cheating is a painful way to end a relationship and often leaves the other partner in a dark place. By presenting these stories, we hope to alleviate the pain you're experiencing by helping you realize that you're not alone. We are a media company focused on delivering the highest quality stories. Sometimes based on true events, our narratives always conclude with a valuable lesson, adding educational value to each video. It was a night like any other, or so I thought, as I prepared for a routine red-eye flight from Denver to Seattle. I'm a commercial airline pilot, and after more than a decade on the job, I had my habits and routines down to a science. But on that particular night, fate had other plans. As my crew and I were going through our pre-flight checklist, an alert lit up on our panel, a mechanical issue with one of the engines. Not exactly the start we'd hoped for. We waited as the maintenance crew worked on the problem, but after nearly 2 hours, the aircraft was declared unfit to fly. All the passengers were rebooked, and I found myself unexpectedly free for the night. Instead of taking to the skies, I was driving home to our quiet suburban neighborhood at 2 in the morning. It wasn't until I turned onto our street that something felt off. I spotted an unfamiliar black Audi parked 2 houses down, facing the wrong direction. Normally, I wouldn't think twice, but in our neighborhood, we knew everyone's cars, and this one stood out. I dismissed it as someone visiting a new neighbor and continued toward my house, telling myself I was overthinking things. But the strangeness only grew as I reached my front door. From inside, I could hear soft music playing, a habit of my wife's when she worked late on her magazine photo edits. But as I slipped my key into the lock, the music abruptly stopped. I froze, an unsettling feeling tightening in my chest. Opening the door, I found the house cloaked in darkness, except for the faint glow spilling down from our home office upstairs. Walking into the kitchen, I spotted 2 wine glasses sitting in the sink, one with my wife's familiar lipstick shade and another with a different, lighter print, a brand new shade, one I didn't recognize. My mind raced. A men's leather jacket lay draped across the arm of our couch, one I'd never seen before, definitely not mine. My pulse quickened as I tried to ignore the evidence gathering in front of me, unwilling to jump to conclusions. Each step up the wooden staircase seemed to echo louder in the quiet house, each one feeling like a countdown. Reaching the office, I found the door closed, but I could hear hurried whispers on the other side, followed by the soft thud of a drawer being shut. I took a deep breath, pushing the door open. There she was, sitting at her desk, feigning casualness as she clicked through her computer screen, looking flustered, her lipstick slightly smudged. "You're home early," she said, her voice forced and uneasy, her gaze darting between me and her screen as if she'd been caught in the act. "The flight was cancelled," I managed, still processing the scene. My eyes swept the room, noticing the open bathroom window and the swaying curtains, letting in the cold February night air. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement outside. Stepping closer to the window, I saw him. Rushing toward the black Audi was the new senior photographer from her magazine, someone she had introduced as a work contact. He'd been to our house twice before, supposedly for project planning. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Shannon stammered, attempting to explain, but her words blurred together in a mix of denials, justifications, and finally, a confession that left me reeling. She'd been seeing him for months, exploring polyamory, she said, waiting for the right time to bring it up to me, after she'd already begun the affair. In a daze, I grabbed my flight bag, barely hearing her muttered apologies. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out," she said as I left, her voice pleading but distant, like a distant echo. I didn't look back. I drove aimlessly that night, numb to the city lights flashing past. My mind replayed every moment, every glance, every conversation Shannon and I had shared in recent months, now tinged with the bitter knowledge of her betrayal. Every detail I'd ignored, every late night at her office, every work event she claimed was essential, it all made sense now, pieces fitting together in a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Eventually, I found myself in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the neon sign flickering against the empty street. I went inside and ordered a coffee, but the warmth did nothing to thaw the chill that had settled over me. I sat there, staring at the dark liquid, trying to understand how I'd missed it, how I'd let my trust blind me to what was happening in my own home. The memory of Shannon's words echoed in my mind, her attempt to justify it as polyamory making me feel both angry and insulted. She'd already made the choice, months ago, no less, and only now was she considering telling me. I clenched my fists, a wave of frustration and heartbreak tightening in my chest. This wasn't just about a single moment of weakness or a one-time mistake, she had actively built an entire life behind my back, one I hadn't been allowed into. For hours, I sat in that booth, the night stretching into dawn. My mind swirled with questions I knew would never have satisfying answers. Had she felt any remorse? Had there been signs of hesitation? Or had she simply seen my trust as permission to live out her desires without consequence? As the sky began to lighten, I realized I couldn't stay there forever. I pulled out my phone, staring at the blank screen, unsure of who to turn to. My sister Emily came to mind. She'd always been there for me, her straightforward advice something I could count on. But the thought of telling her about this felt daunting, as if saying it out loud would make it even more real. Still, I needed support. I typed out a quick message to Emily, asking if she could meet me for breakfast. Within minutes, she responded, her words filled with warmth and concern. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place we used to visit with our parents when we were kids. When I arrived, Emily was already seated, a worried look on her face as she waved me over. As I sat down, the dam broke, and the words came tumbling out, everything I'd seen, everything Shannon had admitted, and every feeling I'd been holding in since that night. Emily listened without interruption, her hand resting on mine, grounding me as I poured out my heartbreak. When I finished, she gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Stu, you didn't deserve this," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever Shannon's reasons, she had no right to do this to you. You trusted her, and she betrayed that trust. That's on her." Hearing the words from someone else brought a strange sense of relief. Emily's reassurance was exactly what I needed to start piecing myself back together, to begin thinking about what came next. As I left the cafe that morning, I realized that this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. I would have to face Shannon, make decisions about our future, and somehow find a way to rebuild my life. But for now, I had someone by my side who understood, who would help me carry the weight until I could stand on my own again. The next few days were a blur. I returned home only when I knew Shannon wouldn't be there, carefully avoiding any chance of running into her. She texted a few times, asking if we could talk things through, each message laced with a plea for understanding and forgiveness. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every word from her felt hollow, too little too late. At night, the house felt foreign, like a museum of memories I didn't recognize. I found myself wandering from room to room, noticing every detail that once brought me comfort but now felt tainted. The framed photos on the wall, the souvenirs from our trips, even the blankets we'd picked out together, all of it felt like a mockery of the life I thought we'd built. After days of silence, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. I needed answers, and I needed closure. I texted Shannon, telling her to meet me at the house that evening. Her reply was immediate, a short, almost eager, "Thank you," as if she thought she could fix things with a conversation. I wasn't there to fix anything, I just wanted to hear her tell me the truth, no excuses, no pretense. As the clock neared 7, I sat in the living room, waiting, the minutes dragging on as I steeled myself for what was to come. When Shannon finally walked through the door, she looked hesitant, her face pale and anxious, as if she were bracing for a confrontation. She took a seat across from me, her gaze darting around the room before finally settling on me. "Stu," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I clenched my jaw, holding back the anger that simmered just below the surface. "Then why did you?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Why lie to me for months, why go behind my back instead of telling me the truth?" She looked down, fiddling with her hands. "I didn't know how," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It just happened, and then I was too deep in it. I didn't know how to come clean." I felt a surge of frustration at her words. "That's not good enough, Shannon," I said, my voice firm. "You didn't just happen to betray me. You made a choice every single day to keep lying." She flinched, finally meeting my gaze. "I know I messed up. I know I can't undo it. But I thought, maybe we could work through this. I still love you, Stu." The words hung in the air, but they didn't have the effect she seemed to expect. I felt no comfort, no relief, only the cold weight of her betrayal. "How can you say that, after everything you've done? You claim to love me, but you've been living a double life right under my nose." Silence stretched between us, filled with all the unspoken resentment, all the hurt I couldn't put into words. She looked away, blinking back tears, but I couldn't let myself feel sympathy. "Not now. I can't do this anymore," I said finally, my voice steady. "I can't keep pretending that this is something we can fix. You made your choice, Shannon, and now I'm making mine." She opened her mouth to protest, to plead, but I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. The look on her face was one of defeat, a mix of regret and realization. Maybe she hadn't expected this, maybe she thought I'd forgive her, that we could somehow move past it. But there was no going back. Not this time. I watched as she gathered her things, each step feeling like a weight lifting from my shoulders. When the door closed behind her, I sat in the empty silence, letting the reality sink in. It hurt, but for the first time since I'd discovered her betrayal, I felt a faint glimmer of peace. This chapter was over, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I was done letting her lies define my life. In the days following our conversation, the house felt emptier than ever, but I felt an odd sense of relief. It was as if finally confronting Shannon and drawing that boundary had lifted a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. But the reality of what I'd lost was still sharp, and the memories lingered in every corner of the house we'd shared. I knew I couldn't keep living surrounded by these reminders of the past, so I made a decision: it was time to move on, literally and figuratively. The next morning, I began packing up my things, sorting through a decade's worth of life. I boxed up the photos, the souvenirs, and the mementos from the trips we'd taken. Some items held good memories, but in light of everything, even the best moments felt tainted. It was painful, but with each item I packed away, I felt a little lighter, a little more like I was reclaiming my life. Emily came over that weekend, eager to help in any way she could. She brought along a thermos of coffee in a bag of my favorite snacks, her presence a steady comfort. Together, we sorted through the final boxes, laughing over silly memories and pausing over the items that were harder to let go of. At one point, Emily found an old framed picture of Shannon and me from a trip to the coast, our faces wind-burned but happy. She looked at it for a moment before glancing at me. "Do you want to keep this?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "No, it's time to move on. I don't need reminders of something that's over." Emily nodded, placing the frame in the donation box without another word. She understood that letting go wasn't just about discarding things, it was about freeing myself from the hold the past had on me. As the day went on, we took breaks, sharing stories about childhood, about times when life was simpler and clearer. The weight of the past began to feel more manageable, softened by the support of my sister and the realization that I didn't have to go through this alone. That evening, after we'd packed away the last box, Emily hugged me tightly. "You're doing great, Stu. This isn't easy, but you're handling it with strength. Just remember, it's okay to take things one day at a time." Her words lingered with me as I settled in for the night, the house quieter than ever but somehow more peaceful. I realized I'd begun to find a sense of closure, an acceptance that maybe this painful chapter was the start of something new. I still didn't have all the answers, but for the first time since discovering Shannon's betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. The future was unknown, and the journey ahead was far from easy, but I was no longer bound to the past. I was ready to reclaim my life, piece by piece, and find strength in the freedom that lay ahead. With my things packed and the decision to sell the house made, I moved into a small apartment across town. It was modest and a bit bare compared to the house, but it was a blank canvas, a place that didn't carry the weight of memories I needed to escape. Here, I could start fresh, without the constant reminders of what had been lost. The first night felt surreal. The walls were empty, the kitchen had no familiar smells, and the silence was thick. But there was a strange comfort in that emptiness, too, a sense that this space was mine alone. I unpacked only the essentials, leaving the rest of the boxes in a corner, taking my time to arrange things on my own terms. In the mornings, I'd make a strong cup of coffee and stand by the window, watching the city come alive below. I started running before work, letting the rhythm of my steps and the early morning quiet clear my head. The physical exertion felt like therapy, each mile a release of the anger and sadness I'd been carrying. I'd finish my runs exhausted but somehow lighter, each day chipping away at the weight that had been sitting on my shoulders. Work became my sanctuary. I took on more projects, volunteering for extra shifts and late hours. My boss noticed the change and threw me into high-profile assignments, which, although challenging, gave me a new focus. My co-workers were supportive, filling the office with a lively camaraderie that reminded me there was life beyond the walls of my past. Emily kept checking in, her calls and texts a steady reminder that I wasn't going through this alone. We'd meet for dinner on Fridays, making it a ritual where we'd catch up on the week and, more often than not, share a good laugh. She'd listen without judgment, offering advice only when I asked for it, knowing that sometimes, just having someone there was enough. One Friday, Emily brought up something I hadn't thought about in months. "Remember how you used to play guitar?" she asked over dinner, her eyes lighting up with nostalgia. "You should pick it up again. You loved it." I laughed, shrugging. "It's been years. I don't even know if I'd remember how to play." "Give it a try," she insisted. "Maybe it'll feel good to get back to something that's just for you." That night, I dug out my old guitar from one of the unopened boxes. I tuned it slowly, my fingers clumsy at first, but muscle memory eventually kicked in. As I strummed a few familiar chords, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. Playing the guitar became part of my routine, a small way of reconnecting with a part of myself I'd nearly forgotten. As the weeks went by, the apartment began to feel like home. I decorated it with things that mattered to me, photos of family, a few paintings I'd picked up from a local gallery, and the books I'd been meaning to read. Little by little, I was building a space that felt like mine, a place where I could be whole again. It wasn't an overnight transformation. Some days were still hard, the memories lingering more than I'd like. But as I filled my days with new routines, new habits, and new dreams, I could feel myself healing, finding strength in the simple act of moving forward. I was learning to live for myself again, and with each passing day, I felt more like the person I was meant to be. As I settled into my new life, a sense of isolation started to give way to possibility. Emily encouraged me to reconnect with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. I'd lost touch with a lot of them over the course of my marriage, letting my social circle fade as I'd built my life around Shannon. But now, I felt the need to rebuild those connections, to find a support network that went beyond my family and coworkers. One evening, I reached out to Liam, an old college friend I'd lost touch with but always remembered fondly. We'd been close back then, bonding over music and late-night conversations about life and dreams. I shot him a text, not expecting much, but to my surprise, he replied almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting to hear from me. "Stu. It's been too long. Let's catch up, drinks on me," he wrote, and we quickly made plans to meet up that Friday at a bar we used to frequent. When I arrived, I spotted Liam at the bar, already waving me over with a grin. He looked almost the same, though there were a few gray hairs and laugh lines I hadn't seen before. We hugged, and within minutes, it felt like no time had passed. The easy camaraderie we'd once shared came flooding back, each joke and story reminding me of the parts of myself that had been lying dormant. Over beers, Liam listened as I told him about the divorce, the betrayal, and the long road to starting over. He shook his head in disbelief, muttering, "I'm sorry, man. You didn't deserve any of that." But he didn't dwell on the sadness. Instead, he focused on the future, the way true friends do when they want to help you move forward. "Let's get you back into the world," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "You've got a fresh start here. Remember all those dreams we had? This is your chance to live them." Liam's words hit home. We spent the rest of the night talking about old ambitions and new goals, laughing over the absurdity of adulthood and the ways we'd both changed over the years. For the first time in what felt like ages, I wasn't thinking about the past or what I'd lost. I was just present, reconnecting with the pieces of myself I'd forgotten. Over the next few weeks, Liam and I met up regularly, grabbing drinks, going to concerts, and even taking a weekend trip to the mountains. It felt good to have a friend who knew me before everything had unraveled, someone who saw me not as a man defined by heartbreak but as the person I'd always been. Liam also introduced me to his own circle of friends, a diverse, lively group who welcomed me as if I'd always been a part of it. We'd have casual barbecues, game nights, and spontaneous outings, filling my weekends with laughter and a sense of belonging that I hadn't realized I was missing. Through these friendships, I found myself laughing more easily, relaxing more deeply, and realizing that I was truly beginning to heal. One evening, as we sat around a bonfire in Liam's backyard, I felt a deep gratitude for the people in my life and the fresh start they represented. They were showing me that life went on, that I could create a future filled with new memories, and that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. That night, as I left Liam's place, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't known in months. This was the life I was building on my own terms, and with each step forward, I felt stronger, more ready for whatever the future held. With Liam's friendship and a renewed sense of purpose, I started pushing myself out of my comfort zone, embracing new experiences that felt foreign at first but soon became a source of excitement. I began saying yes to things I might have once brushed aside, driven by the desire to live a life I could call my own. One Saturday, Liam convinced me to join a group of his friends on a kayaking trip. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, and to be honest, the idea of being out on the water made me nervous. But I found myself agreeing, a part of me curious to see what it would be like. When the day arrived, I met the group at a scenic lake outside the city, the morning fog still clinging to the water, giving the place an ethereal beauty. With Liam's encouragement, I climbed into the kayak, gripping the paddle as the unfamiliar sensation of floating in open water settled over me. At first, I struggled to keep my balance, my movements clumsy and unsure. But as I found my rhythm, I felt the initial tension ease. Soon, I was gliding across the lake, the world around me quiet and calm, the only sounds the gentle splash of water against the kayak. The experience was exhilarating, and as we paddled along, Liam pointed out little coves and hidden spots along the shore. At one point, we stopped in a secluded area where the water was as still as glass, and we simply floated, taking in the view. In that quiet moment, surrounded by friends and nature, I felt a deep peace, a feeling I hadn't known in a long time. Afterward, as we packed up the gear and prepared to head back, Liam clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Not bad for a first-timer," he said with a grin. "Didn't think you'd take to it so well." I laughed, feeling a sense of pride. "Neither did I. But I'm glad I did. This feels good." From that day on, I found myself more open to trying new things. I joined a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never got around to. I took up hiking again, exploring trails I'd overlooked. Even small changes, like going to a new cafe or spending afternoons at local art galleries, became part of my routine. Each new experience reminded me that there was so much to discover, so much life beyond what I'd left behind. One evening, after a group dinner, Liam pulled me aside, a knowing smile on his face. "You know, Stu," he said, "I haven't seen you this alive in years. You're becoming the person you were meant to be." His words struck a chord, resonating with something deep inside me. I realized that I was starting to feel more comfortable in my own skin, to trust my own instincts again. For so long, I'd let myself be defined by my past, by the betrayal and the heartache. But now, each new experience, each small adventure was a step toward reclaiming my life. As I lay in bed that night, replaying the day's moments, I felt a quiet sense of pride. I was moving forward, not just surviving but truly living. The past no longer held me captive, and for the first time, I felt that I was truly embracing the present, ready for whatever came next. One crisp autumn evening, as I was leaving my favorite bookstore, I decided to stop by a nearby cafe for a coffee. It had become my go-to spot on weeknights, a cozy place where I could unwind and watch the world go by. That evening, however, the usual seat by the window was taken, so I settled at a small table near the back. As I waited for my order, a woman entered the cafe, carrying a stack of books and glancing around for an empty seat. Her gaze landed on me, and she gave a polite smile before approaching. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, nodding toward the empty chair. "Not at all," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. She thanked me, setting down her books and placing her order. As she settled in, I noticed she had one of my favorite novels on top of her stack, and before I knew it, we were talking about it, one of those easy, natural conversations that seem to happen only when you least expect it. Her name was Tessa, and we spent the next hour talking about books, films, and music, discovering shared interests with every passing minute. She had a warmth and openness about her that made me feel at ease, as if I'd known her for much longer than an hour. Her laughter was genuine, her smile easy, and as the conversation flowed, I realized I was truly enjoying myself. When the cafe announced its closing, I felt a strange reluctance to say goodbye. Tessa seemed to feel the same, lingering as we gathered our things. As we stepped outside, she hesitated, then looked up at me with a shy smile. "This was really nice. Maybe we could do it again sometime." I nodded, surprised at how easy it felt to say yes. "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers, and as we went our separate ways, I felt a quiet excitement, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to experience in a long time. There was something refreshingly simple about the encounter, no expectations, no complications, just a connection born out of shared interests and genuine conversation. Over the following weeks, Tessa and I kept in touch. Our messages turned into occasional meetups, coffee here, a bookstore visit there, and each time, I found myself looking forward to seeing her. She had a way of making me forget the past, of anchoring me in the present. We laughed about life's quirks, discussed our favorite books and hidden spots around town, and shared stories of both heartache and joy. It wasn't long before I realized that my time with Tessa was becoming something I cherished. She didn't fill a void or serve as a distraction. Instead, she became a part of the new life I was building, someone who met me where I was and joined me as I moved forward. She saw me for who I was, not for the wounds I'd endured. One evening, after an impromptu dinner that stretched late into the night, Tessa looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Stu, I feel like we've both been on our own journeys for a while, finding our way. Maybe it was meant to happen like this, meeting now, when we're both ready for something real." Her words touched something deep within me. It was true, I had spent so much time healing, rebuilding, learning to be okay on my own. Meeting her felt like a natural extension of that journey, not an end to it. I didn't know where things would lead, but for the first time, I was open to the possibilities. As I walked her home that night, I felt a sense of calm and contentment that I hadn't known in years. I didn't need to know where this was going or what the future held. I only knew that I was ready to see where this path would take me, with Tessa by my side. As my connection with Tessa deepened, I found myself facing parts of my past that I hadn't fully let go of. She never pressured me to talk about Shannon, but one evening, as we sat in her cozy living room with cups of tea, she gently asked, "Have you really healed from what happened?" The question caught me off guard, but I realized she was right. I'd moved forward, yes, but there were still parts of my past I was holding on to, memories that had quietly lingered in the background, shaping my decisions and, sometimes, my doubts. So I opened up, sharing the full story of what had happened with Shannon, the betrayal, the shock, the nights spent questioning everything. Tessa listened without judgment, her gaze soft and understanding. It was the first time I'd shared the story in its entirety with someone who wasn't family. I felt exposed, but at the same time, an unexpected weight lifted as the words left me. "It's okay to have scars," Tessa said gently when I finished. "They're reminders of where we've been, but they don't define us." Her words resonated deeply. For so long, I'd allowed the pain and betrayal to shape how I saw myself, as if my past somehow diminished my worth. But Tessa reminded me that I wasn't defined by what had happened to me, I was defined by how I'd chosen to rebuild my life. After that night, I found myself releasing pieces of the past that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I stopped mentally replaying the what ifs and why me questions, and instead, I focused on what I'd gained since that chapter ended: freedom, a stronger sense of self, and a future filled with possibility. Tessa had become a part of that future, not as someone filling a void, but as a companion who understood me fully. One Saturday, I decided to take the final step in closing that chapter for good. I gathered the last few remnants of my life with Shannon, old photos, keepsakes, and mementos I'd kept tucked away, unsure of what to do with them. I took them to the park and sat for a while, reflecting on how far I'd come. The memories no longer hurt the way they once did, they felt like old echoes, faded and distant. When I returned home that evening, I felt lighter, as though I'd shed the final layers of the life I'd once shared with Shannon. There was only the present now, filled with new memories, new connections, and a renewed sense of purpose. Letting go didn't mean erasing the past, it meant embracing the person I'd become because of it. Tessa and I continued building our lives together, but now, I did so without the shadow of regret or resentment hanging over me. For the first time, I was truly ready to step forward, leaving the past where it belonged. In the months that followed, my life with Tessa began to feel like a beautiful new chapter. The weight of my past had finally lifted, and the future felt open, something I could step into freely. Our bond grew steadily, each moment with her a reminder of the strength I'd found in myself. With Tessa, there were no expectations or hidden fears, just a simple, honest connection built on shared experiences and mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, we decided to take a trip to the same lake where I'd gone kayaking with Liam. The air was crisp, and autumn leaves drifted down around us, painting the scene in vibrant colors. Tessa and I rented a small rowboat, and as we glided across the calm water, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come since those first days of heartbreak and uncertainty. As we reached the center of the lake, Tessa looked at me thoughtfully, a warm smile spreading across her face. "You seem different, Stu. Lighter. Like you're finally at peace." I nodded, realizing that she was right. I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel free from everything that used to hold me back. She reached across the small boat, taking my hand, her eyes full of understanding. "I'm so glad," she whispered. "We've both been through so much to get here, but it feels like we're exactly where we're meant to be." In that moment, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me, for the journey, for the strength I'd found along the way, and for the chance to start again with someone who truly understood me. We sat there in comfortable silence, the world around us quiet and serene, just letting the moment settle between us. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the lake, I realized I was no longer afraid of the future. I was ready to build a life with Tessa, one rooted in trust, joy, and a deep appreciation for the path that had brought us together. Back on shore, as we packed up our things, Tessa turned to me with a mischievous grin. "How about a new adventure next weekend? Maybe a road trip?" I laughed, nodding. "Sounds perfect. Let's keep making memories." As we walked back to the car, hand in hand, I felt a quiet certainty in my heart. Life had tested me, broken me down, and forced me to rebuild, but it had also given me the chance to start fresh, with someone who made every day feel like a new beginning. I no longer defined myself by what I'd lost. Instead, I was grateful for what I'd found, a future filled with love, laughter, and the strength I never knew I had. This was my new story, and with Tessa by my side, I was ready to live it fully.